It's venison time, part 2, the grinding. Welcome back everybody to the Outdoor Kruse. This is Shannon, and it's a snowy afternoon, a Sunday morning I should say, and we decided that it was time to grind up some of our leftover venison trimmings that we didn't bring to the processor. And I know I covered this in my first venison video, and this time we're going to go into detail exactly how I do it. A couple of the items that I have right here, some of them I'll go into a little bit more detail later on, but just generally speaking, of course you're going to need your venison, which I've got over here in the sink. I have 30 pounds of venison, and I have that, and I'm going to mix that with 10 pounds of 70-30 hamburger. And I'm going to try something this year. I processed a pig this year. I'm going to add 6 pounds of pork fat to it. Something I'm going to try. That venison stays pretty lean, and I want something a little more of a binder in there. It's a Ford Chevy thing. There's going to be tons of comments that people do use that, don't use that. Well, I'm going to try it. So that's the way it's going to be. Okay, number one, you're going to need your grinder. Again, like I said before, this is just a household grinder that I got at the local Black Friday ad. I know Reed's Sporting Goods has grinders. Had to drop that in there. I'll cover some of the grinding stuff a little better later on. I use meat tubs. Got a couple of meat tubs that I actually stumbled upon at a going out of business sale at a thrift shop, and I bought 8-10 of those. They've been useful for everything. I've got my scale that I covered before. We do about 1 1/4 pounds per pack. And I don't use a food saver. I just use regular old Ziploc bags. Stuff that everybody has around here. I don't add any extra seasonings, anything like that. Only because if you screw up on your seasonings, you can't take it out. You ruin the whole batch. So, venison, 30 pounds of venison, 10 pounds of hamburger. My asterisk option is going to be 6 pounds of pork fat. I'd like to use pork butt, but using what I have today. We'll get to the grinder part shortly. Alright, let's get into the grinding part. Grinder that I'm using today is a 1/4 horsepower, just a household grinder that I picked up on a Black Friday ad. Works great. Again, good for 100 pounds of meat a year, general use. Don't want to heat it up too much. Alright, with this grinder, I got 4 grinding discs with it. A coarse, medium, and a fine, and one for the stuffing tube. Take the fine and the stuffing tube one, set them aside. You're going to be using the coarse and the medium. I know a lot of these have a number on them. I can't find a number on these particular ones. So we will be using those, and we'll be starting with the coarse. First thing we're going to do also is we want to make sure that everything is clean. The last thing you want is any E. coli from some old grinding that you did. So this Clorox Anywhere hard surface is good. You can spray it on there, and it doesn't require any wiping. You can use it immediately, and it kills bacteria. So let's get this thing together so we can start grinding some meat. First thing you do is you take your tube, put it into your grinder. It locks into place. There's a little side deal here that you can tighten it down with, and they're good. Then you have your auger tube. Auger tube goes in. Next, you have your grinding disc, little star-shaped thing. Make sure that the flat edge faces out. That's what goes against your grinding plate. And then again, like I said before, we're going to start with the coarse. So that venison we're gonna send through there with our coarse blade right away. Get all this together, put our collar on, get it plugged in, do a little test run, everything looks good. Then you have your plate for on top, and here's your push tube. That's what we'll use to push the meat down. You're gonna need the medium plate, but you won't need it right away. So let's hang on to that, set that off to the side. Now we're gonna get our venison ready. So we'll talk about that next. All right, our trim. Let's talk about good, clean trim. I do all my own processing, so I know what goes into mine. Still a little bit frozen, but as you can see right there, I package my stuff in gallon Ziploc bags. If you get them too big, they take forever to thaw out. But you do want them cold. So here's my big tip of the day. You want them to thaw out, but just enough that you can either get a knife through them and get them down to this throat size. The throat size that's on your grinder, okay? That's where the meat has to go through, and that's what you gotta cut those to when they start to thaw out. And you want them cold. The colder this meat is, the better off you are. So if you're feeding meat through that grinder and it starts to wrap up on the end, what that means is that your meat is too warm. Put it on a cookie sheet. Have a lot of cookie sheets available. Put it on a cookie sheet. Go out, put it in your freezer, and let it sit there. All this meat right here, once I cut it up, I'm going to put it on cookie sheets or inside one of these meat tubs. I'm going to set it outside so that it can't get any warmer than what it is right now. So again, my gallon packages, they end up being approximately anywhere from 6 to 8 pounds. I weigh them out. I write it right on the Ziploc bag. That way when you take them out, when you start to do grinding, or you bring them in for processing, you know approximately how much weight that you have. Again, like I said before, I processed a pig this year. I have about 6 pounds of pork fat that I'm gonna run through there first. And yep, I go to the Walmart. I buy the 70/30 right here. This is my 10%. I'm sorry, my 30% mixture. So 30 pounds of venison, 10 pounds of hamburger. My asterisk again is my pork fat. So the first step that we do right now is we send all the venison and all the pork fat through with the coarse grinder. All right, it's go time. I got a cookie sheet here, got my meat out on there. I know that I did this, so I know the chunks are pretty small. It's very, very cold to touch. Again, before I get comments on it, the other best way to do this is to take all of your components, all your grinding components, put those in the freezer also. Keep everything very, very cold, and you're gonna have a lot better luck. So let's fire it up, get this baby going. Okay, so here's a pretty common problem, a little self-inflicted, takes a little bit to shoot these videos. So what happens is on the outside of my meat, of course, some of it's it's not warm, but it is, no, it's warm. So what that does is it gums the plate up, okay? Venison, you know, you're trying to utilize every part of that deer that you can. So you get some tallow and stuff in there, and when it's warm, it doesn't cut it as well as we'd like. So you just come in here and you take all of that goop. See, if it's nice and cold and frozen, that stuff just cuts right up. So you'll lose some of your cutting capacity on it if you don't take that out. So I'm just going to clean this up quick. You can see that stringy stuff there. We'll just take care of that quick, get it back down to the auger blade, and we will get this baby cutting again here. Yeah, you can kind of tell because of the center part of it, that's where it's going to clog up right away. So pull that stuff out, and again, keep your meat good and cold. You won't have to worry about it. Now it's time for the pork fat. Again, still using the Coarse grinding disc on it. Didn't take too long to get that done. I have a special assistant that was helping me push that in. I mean, it can be a one-person job, but need someone to grab you a beer once in a while. So now we were off to the pork fat. Like I said, I've never did this style before, so let's see how it goes through here. This probably warmed up a little more than I would have liked it to, mostly because of shooting videos, but how would you learn if I didn't do it for you? All right, let's see how this works. I did, in my tub over here, I pushed all of my hamburger to one side. I separated it, so I'll have like the third of the pork fat on one side and the venison hamburger on the other. And then when we get to this next step, I'll show you how I mix it all together. Okay, the mixing process. First thing you do, if you do have an assistant, have them go over to your grinder, clean your grinding plates, and then set them back in the freezer so that they get cold. It will work better because the next step of this process, everything here is pretty warm. So I'll show you what we're gonna do when I get done mixing it, but having that stuff clean and cold will help you in the process. Now, this is very manual. A mixture would work great, but we just use proportions, right? So I've got my tube of hamburger up here that you can't really see, and I've just divided it into equal chunks. So 70-30 fat hamburger. I have an empty bin. One handful of that. One handful of pork fat. Good handful of venison. And start mixing. You're going to see the time lapse on this, but this is what it's about. It's about squeezing it and pushing it together. But it takes, it's a pain in the butt. It really is what it is. But I take it in my hands and I start squishing it and squishing it and squishing it. And then to try to get a consistency, and then slide that back or forward and work on the next batch. It does, again, this process, it helps to have a helper because you'll wear yourself out. Okay, mixing process is done. As you can see, this should be around 43 pounds of meat. That's what I figure. It's definitely a tub full. I had to kind of utilize both tubs. You probably see that in the time lapse. This next step, I think, will save you tons of time. You could just take this, run it through with the medium grinding disc. And that medium disc, to me, makes it come out just like what you buy in the store. I mean, if you package it correctly, nobody would even know the difference. So what we do, it's pretty warm, it's all been touched, it's all the same temperature. My hands are frozen from doing it, but it's still kind of pulley, okay? That is like that goes in that grinder and just gnarls things up. So what we do is we find anything that's flat, anything that's any cookie sheet, any cake pan, and I take it out and I put it on here, flatten it out. I try to get it around, I don't know, 2 inches thick. And then I go out, I have a big upright freezer. It's plenty cold outside actually, but I layer it up. I go out there and I put it in the freezer and I let it, and I'll check it. It probably takes 30 minutes. A beer's worth. About a beer's worth is what it'll take you. Let that firm up, because by the time you start the first pan, when you get to the last pan, they're pretty hard. They just cut them in slits, send them right down the auger tube, and it goes a lot quicker. And then we get into the bagging portion. So I'm gonna fill these pans up, get them in the freezer, and we'll see you on the next step. Okay, we're into the final grind phase. I have my grinder. I've got the medium grinding disc in it. I've got my cookie sheets of meat, nice and firm. It's not frozen, but good and firm. So this is the final step of the grinding process, and then after this, we'll go through some bagging. But yeah. Welcome to another time lapse. I'm going to start feeding this in. All right, final step. I know it seems a little long and a little draggy, but this is the final step. As you can see right here, we yielded, I figure, around 43 pounds of meat. It'll be we package everything and it's 1.25 pounds, and I figure we'll have, I don't know, 34, 35 packages, maybe 33 by the time we're done eating. So here's what we do next. I've got my scale right here, just a little cheap kitchen scale. It's been a very worthy thing for us for many years. And we weigh a lot of things with it. Anything under 10 pounds is probably accurate. So what we do is we usually just take a little ball like this, and this works better with help too. Put it on there. My stealthy assistant over there will tell me, am I close to 1.25 pounds?
Exactly.
I'm exactly on.
Oh, exactly at a pound.
He's lying. Okay, I'll add a little more. Pretty close. Always got to be as close. And then we'll take, one thing you can do is you can have somebody working ahead of you, just making these little round balls right here and setting them on a cookie sheet. Same cookie sheets that you used before. And like I said before, we use just regular Ziploc bags, freezer bags. I'm doing a terrible job. Obviously you can tell where I belong. Drop them in there. What I do is I just flatten them out. I get them good and flat because they stack way easier inside the freezer. Pound them out so the corners get meat inside of them. Give her about 3/4 close. Good and flat. Seal the top. There it is. Here's our final product. Nice and flat. We stack them on a cookie sheet and we're good to go. It might take you a day. We figure we have approximately the hamburger and the bags, I guess, are the only cost. We're around $24. The 70/30 hamburger used to be cheaper. It's about $2.05 to $2.13 a pound now. Whatever, but you take 10 pounds of hamburger, grind it yourself and you yield 34, 35 pounds of good hamburger. With this fat, I can tell you this, we fried some up. So here's a taste, the initial taste. I can tell there was a lot more grease in the pan. Looks real good. Perfect as usual. I'm gonna hand this to look at them hands. Woo, woo. All right, I appreciate you sticking with me. Give it a try. And again, careful on the seasoning unless you're making it for yourself, because you can't take seasoning away. We'll see you next time on a new episode of the Outdoor Kruse. Talk to you later.